Hi, I'm Chase from UpLift Robotics, and today we're going to be discussing an introduction on how to use SendCutSend for FIRST Robotics. First, we're going to start with going through the order process and everything from the time your parts are exported to what it's like to actually order them and go through that process. And then I'm also going to discuss with you kind of the pricing that goes along with that and how the pricing changes based on things like the material, the density, the thickness of the parts, and the different types of holes and things that you would put on your parts normally. With that said, we're going to go ahead and go onto a screencast here so that you can see kind of the ordering process. I'm going to walk you through that, and then you'll come right back here and we'll talk about pricing.
Okay, so before I walk you through the ordering process, I just want to go through some of the very important things that you need to make sure your parts meet the criteria of before you put them in the SendCutSend website. So first off, in our software, at least, we use PTC Creo. They add a lot of weird bounding boxes and scale references that we don't want when we put them in the computer. So this is an Adobe Illustrator that I'm editing all of this, by the way. You can use Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape, but the same parameters will apply, except with Adobe Illustrator, you're going to be exporting as a .ai file, which is an Adobe Illustrator file. But if you're using a Inkscape editing program, you're going to be exporting as a DXF instead. So first off, with the weird things we have in Creo, and I believe they're existent in most parametric CAD softwares when you export parts, is there's a bounding box around the outside. You can't really see it, but if you drag like your mouse over it, you can see that this box highlights. So what you want to do is delete that, so all of those lines go away. Because if you leave the lines there, the laser cutter will actually cut them. So you don't want that to happen. So obviously we need to remove those. Second is this little scale reference here. I'm using Option and the scroll wheel to zoom in and out, by the way. But you want to remove this scale box because, again, the laser cutter will try to cut it. It's not reading the scale number. That means nothing to it. One thing that's a little unusual about us, but I believe a lot of other teams have it as well, is these concentric rings here. What that is it's for countersinking, which I'll put a picture of countersinking up on the screen, but it's basically where you drill with a drill bit to allow screws to sit flush inside of the metal. And since this is a laser cutter and it can only cut two-dimensional, it can't do that. So anytime you have concentric rings like this, what's going to happen is it's going to cut the inside one out, and then it's going to cut the outside one out. So if you're trying to create any sort of kind of three-dimensional like depth into the part, you can't do that here. It would just make the hole bigger. So what we need to do is actually remove the outer ring because that's where we would drill a recess like the countersink shows. So I have to go ahead and delete all of these circles here so that the laser cutter does not cut those either. Because since SendCutSend is all computer generated, which helps them have really fast lead times, they don't always catch things like that. And if they do, they are still not sure what you actually want to do with them. So they will email you to kind of correct all of those things. So it's very important lead time wise to make sure that those things are correct. And then the other thing is that you'll read through their guide. Make sure you read through their guidelines on their website to ensure that your parts are in a good kind of are in their guidelines and are able to be cut, because we've had issues where they weren't in the guidelines and they had to give us a couple of days to fix them, which delays your parts. So if you're on a time crunch, make sure you follow the deadlines. There's all sorts of different dimension requirements, multiple part requirements. If you're cutting text into it, there's a very specific kind of guideline. So make sure that you follow these. And then lastly, inside of Illustrator, we need to make sure that we are exporting in either inches or millimeters. SendCutSend prefers inches, so I recommend that you export in inches. But a lot of the time it defaults to pixels, so just make sure that when you export, it exports in inches. With that said, we're just going to go ahead and file and save as and export it as a Illustrator file like I mentioned earlier. If you don't have Illustrator, again, you can use Inkscape. Inkscape's free. We've used it in the past. We just had some issues with it, so I would highly recommend being very careful when you use it. and make sure that you export and import in different file formats than Adobe Illustrator, because Inkscape does not take PDF properly, at least from PTC Creo, and it does not export Adobe Illustrator files. So you have to export in a DXF from Adobe Illustrator, from Inkscape. So that's just something to keep in mind. So then now that we're in SendCutSend, you'll need to make an account and log in, which I've already done here. And then what you'll need to do next is you'll go to wherever you want to upload it within your drawing section. You'll hit select file, and we're going to upload the Adobe Illustrator file here. And you'll see that these over here have 2 plates in one file. You do not want to do that. That is an issue we had in the past, and is something that they've started to do now in the future. Is they recommend putting one part per file. So you don't want to double up parts like that. It's actually significantly cheaper to do it this way. And then here, this is going to come up and it will tell you, is your part X dimensions? And then if it's wrong, maybe you need to put it in millimeters. This says 100 inches. You'll need to switch it to millimeters. So that's just something to confirm your measurements. You'll hit next. And then this is where you're going to select your material. So for us, the material we normally cut in is 6061 aluminum. And it is in an 1/8 inch thickness, which we're going to talk a lot more about materials in the future. But for right now, we're just going to go ahead and select that. So I'll also show you they have carbon fiber options. They have pretty much everything under the sun. But for metal, we're going to go to metals, aluminum, 6061, and we're going to go and select our 1/8 inch there. And then since this is part of a drivetrain, we can actually change the quantity that we have as well. And that will actually save you a lot of money. So if you can manage to use duplicate parts in certain areas, I highly recommend it. Because you can see even for just making 2 parts instead of 1, it saves you 20%. And that's on top of whatever discounts that you get through First or as a sponsorship or anything like that. So for us, for example, we make sure that both our left side and right side of our drivetrain are the same and our intake are the same. And it saves us quite a bit of money. So for example, here I would want 2 parts. So I select 2, I get my 20%. You hit next. Deburring, if they give it to you for free, great. All it does is they basically remove all of the kind of sharp edges and loose kind of like shards of metal that are on your parts. So if you don't want it, you don't have to use it. But if they give it to you for free, you might as well, in my opinion. We've never had any issues with it. But from then on, you just hit add to cart. And then you'll see your cart here with all of your orders. This was from old stuff, but yes, so this will be your part, and then you would literally just check out and order it like you'd order something off of like Amazon or any other e-commerce website. Super easy. And then from there, you just get a tracking link and it tells you kind of progress-wise when it's going to ship and all of those sorts of things. So that's it. And now we will go back over to real life with the robot.
So with all that said, let's talk about pricing. So the big factors that come, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about pricing are the size of the parts, the material you're using, the thickness of the material you're using, and the different types of holes, or not necessarily different types of holes, but the amount of holes that you put in your parts. For example, these drive plates here that will show some close-ups up on the screen were our original drive plates for the season. These cost about $80 for the entire drivetrain. Now, the ones that are on the robot currently have a significant more amount of holes to allow us to make modifications on the fly and things of that nature. Now, this drivetrain costs almost double that. It costs somewhere in the range of $140. I'll put the prices up for both on the screen, but the amount of holes changes the price significantly because it takes a significantly longer amount of time to cut because they have to run the laser for that much longer to cut each hole. So there's a lot of different factors with pricing like that. So if you're trying to either maximize your budget or aren't entirely sure what design cuts you should make in order to meet your budget, that's what you want to look at. Are things like how big are my parts, which often you can't change that. The material, which we're going to discuss the materials in a later video, probably the next one after this. And that will play a big role in it. The thickness does as well. If you go with a 30% thinner material, it's going to cost a pretty substantial amount less. So that makes a huge difference. And then again, the amount of holes. That's probably, at least from our experience, the biggest factor is if you put less holes on your parts, it is going to cost less money. That's just because that is by far the longest part of the manufacturing process, is adding more holes. So even if you have to keep the footprint of your part the same, which on a robot you usually do because things have to connect, you can usually somewhere cut back on holes. Like here, we have a lot of pocketing that we didn't necessarily need, but it saves us a lot of weight, which we think is more important. Same thing here. We have all of these holes that we want for mounting options, but if you don't need those, then that will save you a lot of money as well. With all that said, thank you for watching. This was Chase from UpLift Robotics, and we'll see you in another video.